नमस्कार भाइयों बहनों, गुड इवनिंग। आज मैं आपके पास फिर आया हूँ वो टॉपिक लेके जिससे मेरी यूट्यूब शुरू हुई थी, दैट इज क्रिप्टो करेंसी। दैट पर्टिकुलर चैप्टर ओपन मैनी पीपल्स आईज and then we had another round of discussions. Now with sudden urgency that government has shown and everybody is talking about cryptocurrency, I thought we need to revisit this particular issue. Reason is that there is a lot of confusion in the people who are debating. People have no clue what is happening on the cryptocurrency, nor any idea. So to let people be better informed, we decided to have a discussion. For this, I have a wonderful, very eminent panel with me. To grace the particular discussion, I have Lieutenant General Anil Bhalla, who is a former head of defense intelligence, which you can understand the importance of his knowledge. And he talks about technical intelligence gathering, which is very important. So what PM Modi said becomes very relevant, and he'll be throwing light on that. I have CA Sumit Mehta, a person with 20 years experience in research and investment banking, member of Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, London, and has written a book about GST for doctors. And he advisor to Tata Group and has worked with government in many housing plans, etc. here and overseas, and has been a regular panelist on financial TV channels. With me is veteran Deepak Kapoor. He is a founder of Begin India think tank, the only think tank which is working on the forensics intelligence on cryptocurrency and related issues, and is also founding member of the founder of BPO Association of India. So vast experience, highly specialized. Unfortunately, I see less of such people on TV debates and more of such people who talk just from the top of the discussions that they hear from others. So as an opening remark, I will open with the PM Modi's remark. He was talking a Sydney dialogue. He said it is important that all democratic nations work together on this, that is cryptocurrency, and ensure it doesn't end up in the wrong hands, which can spoil youth. So we can understand what is hinting at. Then he says unregulated market for digital currency cannot be allowed to become avenue for money laundering and terror finance. He carries on. He says Bitcoin represents a risk to younger generation. Then we also have to note, having said that, we will note that 100 million Indians embrace virtual currency.
Cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, for example, it is important that all democratic nations work together on this and ensure it does not end up in wrong hands, which can spoil our youth.
And Shashikant Das, RBI governor, says cryptocurrency is a threat to financial system. And I have some very interesting figures which I just cut from Sucheta Dalal's article today. I will like to quote some of the figures. They are so compulsive that I must talk about them. The article gives us some information. I had shared this information earlier on when in earlier programs, but these are updated. In August 2020, US Department of Justice revealed information on donation drives by Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Hamas affiliate Al-Qassam brigades through layer transaction routed through Syrian crypto exchange Bitcoin transfer and received to individual groups. AQB had 3 official websites since 2019 collecting donations through Bitcoin. In September 2020, the French police had arrested 29 people for raising funds in the country by converting them to Bitcoin or funding jihadi activity in Syria. In June 2021, Financial Action Task Force, ATF, in a report says that it has been used for the Christchurch mosque terror attack in New Zealand. Then there are so many such cases that your eyes will be wide open when you hear those cases. Israeli National Bureau that tracks counter-terror financing sees 84 crypto wallets in July 21 used by entities linked to Hamas for raising donations. They contain 7.7 million worth of digital currencies such as Bitcoin, Dogecoin, etc. And then talking of money laundering, a study by Crypto Intelligence from Chainalysis found that Eastern Europe has emerged the hub of illicit cryptocurrency. Then you have UK police sees 180 million pound worth of cryptocurrency as part of anti-money laundering operations. In addition to 114 million worth cryptocurrency seized in June 2021. In November 21, US Department of Justice, through Operation Dark Hunt Tor, busted an international darknet-based opioid traffic operating with 31.6 million in cash and virtual currencies and a big haul of drugs. China's Operation Card Breaking, a nationwide crackdown in June 2021, led to arrest of over 1,100 action against 170 criminal organizations. In September 21, the Chinese government banned cryptocurrency and notified all transactions are illegal. So some examples. So we understand the seriousness of money laundering. We also understand the seriousness of terror funding. The last early episode, we had talked about regulation rather than ban of cryptocurrency, because we cannot really, throw away a wonderful technology like blockchain technology because somebody else is making a wrong use of it. And with the bill, which is not very clear what it is, we will discuss what can be the possibilities. So first of all, talking of terror funding and talking of opium network, which is run on, or drugs racket run on these cryptocurrencies, I would request Lieutenant General A.K. Bhalla to put his knowledge, put forward his knowledge for us. Lieutenant General Bhalla.
Thank you, Shri Shahjaji, thank you. I mean, I'm in the midst of experts. You're the policy and the regulatory framework expert, while we have Deepak Ji, who is a technical expert, and the only one, as you've already mentioned. And I was just reading this morning how the Cryptocurrency and Regulation of Official Digital Currency Bill of 2021 seeks to create a facilitative framework for creation of the official digital currency to be issued by the RBI. Now, I will not, I'll very humbly state I'm not competent to talk on regulation or even on the financial aspect, for which we have experts here. On the contrary, I'm the other end of the spectrum, the user end. And the user end, the time that we were strategically analyzing a host of issues, amongst them, the principal issue was, where is the funding coming from for issues of terror? And willy-nilly, we found that there's a connect, not just with terrorism, with insurgencies, but also these Hawala transactions and underhand transactions through the medium of Bitcoin or to cryptocurrency were actually willy-nilly had a direct connect with the anti-terrorism actions. Now, why? Because we find that, let's take the case of J&K. Now, as an execution end, as a relatively mid-level officer, I've functioned there. I've done counterinsurgency operations. I've controlled them. I've been coordinating them. And then as the DGIA, we had a strategic overview of what's going on and how it was happening. I dare say that the one bottom line was, while in the initial years when we were operating there in J&K in the 90s, there were wads of currency and there were all counterfeit currency which would be found on the bodies. Of when we happened to neutralize certain terrorists, we'd find a host, bagfuls of currency, most of it counterfeit, coming in from across the Pakistan border. But later, we found a very major switch where there'd be no currency. They'd be having smartphones or satellite phones, and they have all sorts of high technology stuff. And but despite that, they continue to function. So obviously, they had handlers who were handling all this once they got into their field of operations, that is, whether it was J&K or Central India or elsewhere. So the one common thread was funding. And this took a rather serious note, a serious turn the moment Bitcoin and cryptocurrency untraceable came in. And having, as an amateur, studied this and been exposed to a lot of analytics done by various people, we had occasion to come across a host of deductions, conclusions, which with the Joint Intelligence Cell and the Chairman JIC that time, who now the Governor in Nagaland, Mr. Ravi, compiled. And I dare say the first time I saw major focus being given to it in this domain, where they realized the import, the significance, the seriousness of the issue, was when Mr. Ajit Doval and the NSA, who I was reporting to, directly undertook this through the medium of the IB, the technical cell. But now I'd like to state a very basic, fundamental issue, if I may, that, as a law enforcement agency, you look at the financial regulatory framework to regulate this. Technically, the users are the law enforcement agency of the data which is generated, the money flow, the end user, and so on and so forth. So there's this dichotomy which actually needs major resolution, where we find that the law enforcement agents don't have the technical expertise to be able to trace it out. They just want ready-made answers. And on the other hand, the regulatory and the policymakers don't realize the significance and the speed and the variety of inputs that are required to be generated in order to be able to help the law enforcement or the financial. For example, there is a revenue intelligence also supposed to. So revenue intelligence, I feel, needs to be really, they are empowered, they're doing a wonderful job, and given the very meager resources and the links to the NIA and others, it's generating now a lot of input. But I personally feel that while there is a financial, regulatory and policymaking framework and a body under the Honorable Finance Minister, who happened to be sitting with the principal economic advisor along with Mr. Deepak the other day, and we found they actually put their teeth into it in a big way. But I would go a step further that there should be a similar cell established, whether in the Revenue Intelligence Directorate or in the NIA, or whichever agency. That's for the National Security Council Secretariat to take note, which they have. I'm sure there are experts sitting there, and Mr. Doval is actually keeping a hands-on watch on this. I'm aware of it, and we come across in informal discussions, of course, in very private, confidential discussions, that this really needs to be handled. But I'm not too sure what are the linkages between these regulatory bodies and the law. Once that is established, there is a real time to pick up a PAX phone and just find out what's going on and home on to a particular lead, and you get answers, because, at the end of the day, it's the reactive mode to be able to nab the guys who are end users. That I, as a defense intelligence practitioner, would say, which technically not my job within the country, but the job of the IB and CBI and the state police. Now I come to the states. Certain states have already taken steps in this direction. I'm aware informally, I read a lot of write-ups. In fact, Mr. Deepak himself has broken into the Haryana government, where he's given a huge amount of inputs to the Haryana government. We need to also, again, configure the state police apparatus to be able to hook on to the same central reservoir, or where they cull the data that they want to, which is particular to the states. I think I'll not say much here. I'll leave it to Mr. Sharda to hereafter share this. If there's any question, I think. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lieutenant General Bhalla. Mr. Smith, you would like to add anything to what the kind of threat perception that the General has talked about?
Thank you, Sharda ji. Here, I totally agree with General Saab that cryptocurrency has a huge threat on the economy as well as on the national security of the country. Money flow becomes very easy, and I am not an intelligence expert like General Saab. I'm not a technology expert like Deepak ji. But as a chartered accountant, as a person who understands money flow and auditing the money trail, what I can say with confidence is, take for instance smuggling. Now today, if ISIS Khorasan province has to send money to India, to their counterpart somewhere in any place in the country, one is sending it in form of gold. And we have seen what has happened in Kerala. Swapna Suresh case is a classic example. Now, instead of having to use a mule, and if I have to say hypothetically, I'm just giving numbers because that is my forte. say 5 crores has to be transferred, 10 kgs of gold has to be moved, and that is a cost associated. Instead of doing that, the easier way out is transfer 10 or 50 or 100 cryptocurrencies into the wallet of a person in India. Very simple. It is a digital transfer. It is an online transfer. You don't need mules. You don't need anything. Money has come into the country. Now, when we look at the cash flow part, again, how do they encash it? There is a huge hype created, and Sharda ji knows it very well. Deepak ji knows it, that average age of an investor is less than 25 years. So the millennials are roped into it with a hype about it, that money will grow in this particular way. So with this particular hype, what happens is that people will be buying it, and the cryptocurrencies which are transferred into the wallet of a counterpart of a terror organization in India, because of the given hype about that particular invest as an investment opportunity, that money will double in a few months or a few years, they'll start buying it. So they can encash it, use that domestic rupee currency that they have got by selling cryptocurrency to fund terror activities in India. It is not just terror activities, it is also pertaining to activism in India, say any kind of agitation, any kind of movement in terms of, say, banning any developmental project, stopping production of a certain industrial unit, or say any kind of other protest or activities to be done. All these things, money is required in India in local currency. So they have created a whole hype around cryptocurrency as an investment source. And that is the way they see. This is a whole science known as behavioral finance or investor psychology, in which there was an advisor of Tony Blair named Richard Thaler, who has even got a Nobel Prize for analyzing this whole behavior. So my point is that here, national security is one issue. Money laundering definitely happens in this manner. There's a flight of capital issue, because you read out about the economic part. There is a flight of capital. Money is coming in. Now, my question here, and I would say that the government has done the right thing, because there is no trail. Ideally, currency can be issued only by the sovereign, nobody other than the sovereign. Here, there are private individuals who are issuing currency. Now, if I have to ask a question, simple audit question, how many bitcoins are mined every year? I'm just using one bitcoin as an example, but it is for all the other currencies. It is not only for bitcoin. How many cryptocurrencies are mined? How many of them are mined by the people based out of India? Second question. Third question, the currencies which are mined by some outsiders, foreigners, how does that come into India? Now, the thing is, when we are controlling our currency, the government has the right to control the currency, the money flow, and the available liquidity in the market. Does Indian government have control over the issue of bitcoins, number one, or for that matter, any other cryptocurrency? Second, how many cryptocurrency stock is held by foreigners, and how much of that is coming into India? These are all factors, because that control on that, even today, if we have to allow steel to come into India, or pharmaceuticals to come into India, or even Kandils and other things coming into India, government has a control over it. We can put import duty, we can put anti-dumping duty, we can ban imports. Can we do that for cryptocurrencies? No, it is not possible. So when that is coming into India, money is going out. Money is going out in form of hawala. Now, are we able to trace it? It's very difficult. So my view is, there is a national security issue, there is a flight of capital issue, there is a hawala and money laundering issue, there is a bigger issue, that is bribing and corruption. If I have to get some work done and I have to pay some money, the easiest way is I'll transfer Bitcoin into, or any other cryptocurrency into, the account of that particular official, and I'll get my work done. That person also has it anonymous. He can use that money outside India for traveling or investments.
There's no need for a corner side panwala.
Exactly. I remember those corner side panwalas and various other things in front of government offices. That was the first thing I did at the age of 18 when I started my articleship. So that is done away. The bigger concern is, Sardaji, here the bigger concern and the biggest is, after the start of the pandemic, we have slowly gone in for formalizing our economy, and we are reducing the component of informal economy. There was a SBI report that from 48% informal economy, formal economy, informal economy, which was 48%, it is now reduced to 20%. 80% is formalized. Now, this is a big thing. we have brought maximum thing ever. Panwala is also taking a GPay or a Paytm payment. So everything is accounted. Now, when we are trying to control one ghost, okay, one beast is coming under control. There's another beast which is unleashed, and there will be black money market, in informal economy, parallel economy coming up in form of cryptocurrency. How do we catch it? It is much more difficult because even that is not under the control of the government. The currency is not issued by the government. So this is a concern for the nation as a whole, from the tax angle, from the national security angle, from a exchange control angle. And I would say that I would like to end with this whole game of cryptocurrency is an anarcho-capitalist or an ANCAP idea, where they are looking at undermining the state and rejecting the idea of state control. And they are supported by the whole brigade of libertarian cheerleaders who are dancing on the tune and joining the chorus. With this, I'll end. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sumitji. See, if you talk of the threat to national economy, in fact, national economy in collapse can simply be collapsed by controlling a section of that particular money using cryptocurrency in a big way. And you talked about the lack of traceability. Deepak Kapoor specializes in tracking transactions in cryptocurrency, and he has succeeded to a great extent with international collaboration of tracking some of the biggest amounts of money that have changed hand and that have created problem for India. Just to give an example of the level, in India, the enforcement director issued show cause notice to WazirX, India's largest crypto exchange, in June 21 for 2,790 crore transactions in contravention of Foreign Exchange Management Act. So this is just one example, and there are so many other examples. The amount of money that is going out because of cryptocurrency is phenomenal, and laws can be made. But the question is whether ban is the right way. Definitely ban is not the right way, because it is not a question of anarchy. It is a question of using a technology for a purpose it was not meant to be, probably. And for example, now, if I'm not wrong, Goldman Sachs has moved into blockchain technology for its own banking. So it has got wonderful uses. But to believe that you need some kind of cryptocurrency to exploit the technology is not correct, because technology is freely available. We are looking at the other way around. Actually, blockchain technology is what started all this. It is not cryptocurrency will teach us what is blockchain technology. So one who has got deep insight into this, Deepak, you would like to add anything onto the two aspects that these people have brought up, the two earlier panelists?
Thank you, Sharda ji, and hello, everybody. I think the background that Sharda ji has said, and then, Lieutenant General Bhallaji and Sumit ji, I think that paves, it's a fantastic flow of information that has kind of started. I would just like to add to everybody's contribution to the debate so far. Sharda ji, I would like to, you put in some numbers. There's a very interesting fact. There is a Forbes article from, I think 2018 or 2018, I believe. And to the best of my memory recollection, it says how Bitcoin and WikiLeaks saved each other. Now, WikiLeaks was one of the first known users of Bitcoin, because their US accounts were frozen. And well, I can't authoritatively qualify the number of Bitcoins that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange held, but I think I would feel very safe to say that he held almost 5,000 Bitcoins. And that time the cost of Bitcoins and the value of Bitcoin was nothing. And then later on, in a little later, Julian Assange went on record thanking the US government because he experienced, I think, a 50,000% increase in the value of his Bitcoins. And you look at it, okay, WikiLeaks is an organization that governments don't like. We will not even get into the merits of why they don't like it. Is it good or bad? But they don't like it. So if a government does not like an organization, and an organization is sitting on a few double-digit $1 billion, you can imagine if they want to damage something or somebody. And WikiLeaks, pries into information supposedly held sacred and classified, and then unveils it. Let's not even get into the motives of it. But under any country's laws, if there is any classified information, if it is just given up like that, I believe it is illegal. It calls for very stringent legal action against the individual or the organization. So that's one part that I wanted to add to Ratan Shardaji's observations and the numbers that he gave. Lieutenant General Bhalla touched upon very beautifully on the side of on the aspects of cryptocurrency that most people, one, they do not understand, second, they don't want to talk about. I personally believe, and I've been in this field for almost 3.5 to 4 years, very actively on a 9 to 5 basis. I've had the fortune of interacting with possibly the best global experts, global organizations, forensics companies, and we've done quite a lot of work. And I'm building, my statement now on the top of all that experience and knowledge that I've gained from experts. That the national security aspect, the terror funding, the money laundering, and Sumitji also touched upon, agitation funding against usually the governments and basically, government projects. So these are the issues that should be more important to any policy of any central bank vis-a-vis the digital currency or the so-called crypto, the national cryptocurrency of any country released through their central banks. And why do I say that? Because you look at the fundamentals. When you say that we are transitioning to a digital currency, we don't say that we are transitioning to a new currency. We are simply saying that the transactions that take place or the technology that is available now is a little different and possibly better than before. The fundamentals of the currency are going to be the same. The name of the currency possibly will not change, except you might add a word digital with that currency. The rupee remains the rupee. Look at Paytm. The user experience of any CBDC would possibly not be very different from how we use Paytm and other UPI, BharatPay, PhonePe, and all this. So, the backend suddenly becomes different, and borrowing from Lieutenant General Bhalla and Sumitji, I think that people who are unscrupulous, who want to misuse technology, misuse the benefits of a new technology, are going to have a field day. So I would say that the most important thing that the government and others in policy making should look at is, the aspect of terror funding and money laundering, how easy it has become. So I would, on a scale of 1 to 10, say out of 100%, I would simply imagine that 40% should be the economic aspect of it, because it concerns a lot of balance of payments between different currencies, how one technology of one central bank will talk to another one. Those things are very important. I would say 40% would fall to the forensics and the law enforcement side, because that's a huge danger to any country and possibly to its fiat currency as well. If too much of private cryptocurrency flows into a nation and tries to destabilize economies, and the rest, I think, are the rest of the issues that concern businesses, exchanges, investors. I think that is how I would distribute the importance of various issues under the total law or the total act, that policy act that's possibly going to be announced in the next 48 hours. So I think these are the key issues. And of course, we have been talking to a lot of organizations. We've been getting the help very quietly, on the very quiet, because what we do, it is unadvisable for us to come out and go to national channels, as Sharda ji said. Selectively, yes, we have spoken to some people abroad in the global media, but by and large, we stay away. We like to do what we like to do. I think I would put up a red herring and say that the situation is very alarming as we speak today. Sumitji, you said that there's a lot of flight of capital. How does the money come in when you buy cryptocurrency? Now I'm going to give you a data of which was valid till at least late 2019 of all mining that took place in the specific brand of cryptocurrency, that is the Bitcoin. 73% was mined in China. So irrespective of who you were, where you bought, in which country you bought your Bitcoin from, it would actually have to come through a mining company situated in China. Your entire data is flowing. It is very nice for all of us to say that it is encrypted. It is encrypted for an outsider, not for the server owner who initiates that kind of mining. This is all humbug, and we know that China loves to collect data from all over the world. 1, 2, the money is flowing there. Almost 73% of all Bitcoins being originated there, and 65 to 70% of all money to originate a single Bitcoin flows to China. Now look at the ramifications financially and otherwise. So Sumitji, I think you touched upon a very important point, which I think the government should take real note of, when they are making the policy. I think these are enough points to discuss as of today. It's a very large field. The more we keep going into it.
Further, in fact, there are 5 countries that allowed legal Bitcoin trading: US, Canada, Australia, European Union, and El Salvador. There are 14 countries in various stages of experimenting with the cryptocurrency as a legal tender, or rather saying the digital currency as a central bank, CBDC. So these include China, Sweden, South Korea, and there is, of course, 81 other countries working on same. So we are not one of the early ones. We are not one of the first. We are not one of the earliest ones also. But we have taken cognizance of this at the right moment. Last time we discussed about how we go about it, then we had talked about it being a very complex issue, not to be left to RBI alone, and that we need an interdisciplinary team, which includes finance, which includes legal heads, and we also includes intelligence, including military intelligence, defense intelligence, because there are too many dimensions. So it is not suddenly you can go to Lok Sabha and say we want to ban cryptocurrency or we want to legalize or regulate cryptocurrency. You need people with the forensic expertise. You need people who know how it ultimately ends up. So whether the government is going to have such a team where all the 3 or 4 aspects of cryptocurrency management or digital currency management are talked about, I also hope that the bill is not taken in a partisan spirit by opposition. It is a national security issue. It's a national economic issue. So I hope there is a very detailed discussion in Parliament, and also there are committee formed with where the experts we talked about, not just RBI experts, but experts of all the disciplines. So we can capture all the dimensions and we can come with a very comprehensive solution where technology is not dumped along with some illegal issues. So when you talk of financial regulations on cryptocurrency, General Bhalla, would you like to add to what kind of approach we should have on the law? You may not talk about the details of the law, but how can we have a team or we can have an approach to having this regulation on cryptocurrency?
I'm going to take recourse to a functional example which I happen to visit, and I'm sorry, I will be quoting about a command center established in Tampa, Florida, in the Special Operations Command of the U.S. Defense Establishment. Now, I have the singular honor of having been part of a very high-level team which visited Tampa, Florida, before I retired. And in there, the command and control center, well, I felt as though I was in a bullpit, literally, with everybody plugged in there. And there was monitors all around the room. It was a semicircular kind of room. And, everything from revenue intelligence, homeland security, issues of customs, border management, military issues, nuclear missile inputs, and so on and so forth. Now, this was an eye-opener, actually, and we did make a start, and Mr. Doval started the multi-agency centers, the IB started it, and the NSA expanded on it, and I was very much part of it to conduct these multi-agency center briefings every week, every fortnight, where all IB, CBI, and so on and so forth, BSF, CRP, Rep 6 to 10, and very high-level guys, so gentlemen. So, having said that, so a similar multi-agency center, I'm borrowing the word currently in usage with the intelligence organizations, which also has a similar thing at SMAC called the State Multi-Agency Center. They have a, shoots going out onto all the states with the result that they're all hooked on to the central. Now, similarly, an amalgamation of, you yourself mentioned, and Mr. Deepak mentioned, of people from the financial world, people from the RBI banking world, from the revenue intelligence world, and then obviously the intelligence agencies are all plugged in there. It's not today about physical meetings like the MAC does. It's now going to be digitized. It is already, we are far, far advanced there. And I think to that end, the NTRO has done yeoman's work there. Again, the complete focus has been provided by the National Security Council Secretariat, where unlike our time, where NTRO has been become the primary technology provider. So since it's doing it in various other domains, which I'd rather not mention, that issues like cyber, generic signal intelligence, satellite imagery, so on and so forth. So similarly, something on the Cryptocurrency Command and Control Center, which is the technology steered by the NTRO, and this framework is established. Venue can be any place. I mean, that is, if though Mr. Deepak mentioned this 40-40-20 is breakdown is given for finance, defense, security, and illegal transaction, and 20% of miscellaneous. I won't differ, but I have my take on it. I would root at 50 to 60%, which have security implications. The balance are banking and companies, which are all actually the same. Even if a company is into it, those guys are. I'm sorry, I'm not an expert, Mr. Chadha. I'm stepping on your turf there. But the fact is that those are 60%, to my mind, is the money flow, which needs to be monitored. So perhaps the National Security Council may be the best place to have such a as a venue, and you have a whole floor devoted to it, and everybody plugged in, and you have the NITI Aayog next door, so all sorts of inputs are coming there. And then you have to have a disbursement, a methodology where the same technology is utilized to be able to relevant, need-to-know basis, people concerned for immediate action, corrective action. And it has to be enforced in such a fashion that the guys think twice before these youngsters, because they are the mavericks. They are the guys who want to do everything out of the box. You have these in the dark web. You have, well, no offense meant, in the East European countries, some of these countries, I won't like to name them, where you have underground silos with hundreds of these youngsters, or dozens of these youngsters sitting there day in, day out, riddled with cigarette smoke in the dark, and working on this. And so it has to be some sort of a thing which is totally integrated. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chad.
Thanks, General Bhalla. Coming to talk about the laws, since I talked about the law that is being made, we'll remember that RBI had pushed a bill for banning cryptocurrency. It was thrown out by the courts. The reason was probably poorly drafted law. The reason was that there was not enough discussion with the multidisciplinary agencies. And the worst could be that the judiciary had no clue at all what they're talking about, or what they think this entire threat to the national security and financial institutions is. So we need to sensitize not just the lawmakers, but also the judiciary and also the people who are finally going to be affected. So on the issue of lawmaking, one of the suggestions that Lieutenant General Bhalla talked about is cryptocurrency command center. That could be part of the entire thing that we're talking about. So one important part could be actually monitoring and forensic expertise, which is not with the state governments or even with the central government with a very limited manner, and RBI do not know. But overall, it will need a massive exercise to sensitize all the people involved in banking sector as well as in security sector, how about to go about this technology and how to use the forensics tools properly. So once you put a ban and you say thing has gone underground, then this is a continuous fight of technology versus technology. It will keep on changing. So unless you continued education, you have continued forensics on that, it won't happen. But on the law side, since we're talking about the law, what could be the kind of laws that we can talk about? Sumit, you can first speak on this.
Thank you, Sharda ji. Now, here the first thing is the law is too primitive. My understanding, I have read the act, the draft bill which is presented. I have read the interministerial committee report on this whole issue. And it was eye-opening to hear what General Saab said, that there is a need for, because when I was reading this whole act, I felt that there are many loopholes. And if you permit, I can discuss one or two afterwards. But we need.
You can put it in brief right now. There is no issue. These are the last rounds.
Okay. Okay. So say, take for instance, now a Bitcoin is worth around 50 lakh rupees. Now 50 lakhs is not something that a millennial can easily invest in. What I perceive is that they have not mentioned about the money flow within India. They are only talking about the movement of crypto. So what General Saab said is very true, that we'll have to build up a good amount of technical intelligence to see how the money, how the Bitcoins or other cryptocurrencies are moving from one wallet to other, which I believe is Deepak ji's forte. But there is a bigger angle in the money flow within the country, and that needs to be traced. Now, I will give you a hypothetical example. I am a person who is getting Bitcoins or any other crypto. I'll take Bitcoins, for example, because it is a 50 lakh rupees worth of thing. I have to now liquidate it in India. Instead of selling it to someone, I can create a mutual fund kind of structure in India, wherein I will say that 50 people can put 1 lakh rupees each. In a year, your money will double. So I've got 50 lakh rupees in the first hand, which I will distribute to all the people within the country who are supposed to get money from foreign sources. Okay. Now, second thing is, now Bitcoin prices will continue to go up. At the second stage, I have to provide exit to the current investors, because unko bhi profit deke bahar nikalna hai. I have to book their profits. Some new investors will come in. They will buy the same cryptocurrency at a pro rata at a price of 1.5 lakh rupees. I'll keep, say, 20,000 with myself. I'll give 1.3 lakh rupees to the original investor. Other 20,000 which comes in will again go into funding some kind of illegitimate activities or anti-national activities or subversive activities. Now, these are the kind of things, because see, technology is required on the larger framework. The definitions are required, but the law is inadequate when we come to what is going to happen within the country, where a cryptocurrency is not sitting on a wallet in India or of a person in India, but it is an underlying security or an underlying asset basis which a person in India is doing some kind of activities. So these all factors, see, I'll tell you, law benders or law breakers are much more intelligent than lawmakers. And by the time law is passed, they will come out with many more loopholes. I can say I'm a small fry. I'm not even into the system, but Deepak ji can say with confidence that how many new, and of course, if he has some more financial geniuses who are looking at money flow, they'll come out with other 10 loopholes to bypass this whole thing. So my understanding is that this is a very difficult area. Beyond understanding technology, there is a need to continuously update ourselves with the new developments about making the law much more stringent. And what you have rightly said is the judiciary. The biggest concern is, see, at one point of time, if I have to go back, when income tax used to raid our houses, they would break the wall and there used to be another wall, or, there used to be, like, in the ceiling, there would be artificial ceiling where there would be cash. Now here, how do
even yesterday, there was a report of somebody hiding the money in a drain pipe.
Yeah, yes. So now here, when there is an income tax raid, how are they going to find out that this Bitcoin belongs to this person, or how the money has come into India? Second thing is, there was a GST issue on Bitcoins and cryptocurrency. Now, when the cryptocurrency is coming out from another country, is there an implication of custom duty on it? Because it is a commodity, or whether it is an investment. So even on gold, it is an investment, it is a store of value, there is a custom duty on it. So these are all where the investigating agencies, the multiplicity of agencies, and everybody works in their own manner. So what General Saab has said is a very valid point, but the enforcement angle, not just the intelligence and the technical, but the enforcement, legality, the enabling legislations, the understanding of the judiciary, the ability of the public prosecutor or the lawyers to present the case, these are all extreme, and very importantly, the money cycle. These are all very extremely difficult issues which need to be deliberated, and we need a multidisciplinary team for this. This is what I have. Thank you very much.
Deepak ji, your take on what kind of committee or what kind of law could be made, rather than having these 2-paragraph laws which are, being distributed on the net by various news agencies and TV centers. that these are probably the laws, as it is some kind of local handling of what we're talking about. You're talking of a universal, every kind of super intelligence network you're talking about. Sumit just talked about some kind of digital chit funds and kitty parties, which is possible with better returns. Those are minor issues, but yes, at a larger scale, it can be a big game. So what kind of laws or what kind of framework could be created for the laws? I would not even say it's possible to make a law in a week or whatever. It is possible to create a framework which will create a law, which will cover all these aspects that security people have talked about, finance people have talked about. As a technical person, what do you see the future of such a law, what it could be?
Sharda ji, I will borrow something from General Bhalla and then from Sumit ji. I mean, I disappointed as well as rewarded, a sense of reward saying this. I've said the exact same thing that General Saab just said, almost the same term, that we must have a crypto command and control center. I said this in late 2018, and we went out globally in sometime in 2019 and said it, globally. So I feel very rewarded that, somebody of the caliber of General Saab, who's seen the kind of things that he's seen and the kind of things that he's done for the nation, which is so relevant in our talk today against, the menace of cryptocurrency. So I feel rewarded and I feel disappointed that, nothing has, that point has not even been touched upon.
But Deepakji, if you remember what PM Modi said, he said that we need to have a cooperation between various countries. So he does understand the serious and does understand it requires global cooperation. On that point, it is very clear.
Let me come exactly to that with a specific example. I just want to say one point from the prior thing that I was, my chain of thoughts, and then I'll come to what you just said and make it relevant with a real life example in India. Sumit ji said that, and you also said that, judiciary needs to know what this beast is before they can tackle it. There are 52 big cases in India of either crypto scams or illegal funding, something to do with the illegality of how, crypto was traded or something illegal done with, through it or because of it. Not one has seen a decent charge sheet. The law enforcement does not know how to collect the evidence in this. I could put a Bitcoin address right in front of them from a confiscated hard disk, and they wouldn't know night from day. And I'm telling you, I've seen this in practical, physically. I don't think so I should name the people and the places, but you get the drift. Two, they do not know how to present that in a way that the law would recognize it. And while saying all of this, I think that more than 85 to 90% of the problem can be solved with existing laws. If, there's a lot of coordination between the law enforcement, evidence collection, and the lawyers. Then the next step, even if it is presented, well, the judiciary says, where is the proof? There is no tracking. Everybody's gotten bail. So this is where we stand today in terms of 52 really big cases. So, from 40, 50 crore scams to almost, recognized in the court, 300 million scams, which I disagree. I would add a few zeros to almost all of them because nobody knows how it is being tracked. Now, coming back to coordination, there is a recent case of a few months back, Chinese company running an illegal casino, 3 or 4 so-called shell companies in Gurgaon. Somebody invests almost 98,000 or 96,000 rupees in Hyderabad, feels he is cheated out of the illegal, I would say illegal casino, but he said casino. Police investigates, sees that there is something illegal, gets into it. There's almost 1,200 crore illegal operation going. 3 Chinese people arrested, possibly from Gurgaon, I think. One person in Surat who was disbursing the winnings. Now this is important, in Bitcoins. He's accepted that he dispersed almost 4.25 or 4.5 crores worth of coins. Now please tell me an illegal operation where there's a disbursement of 4.5 or 4.25 crores, which has been accepted by the person. Does anybody here of all of us today believe that there weren't investments coming in through those things? And the investments, do you think they would be 3, 4, 5 crores? I peg this entire thing beyond 10,000 crores. Now, there is no coordination between, I'm not even talking about domain knowledge that you spoke about, what the PM said. I think we are at least 2 to 3 years away from what the PM said to make it a reality. I'm talking today. We did speak with individually with these law enforcement agencies across states. They still have no coordination. Now, I think that goes to prove the point that you set out with. So, I think what I said holds as we speak today. It is true that there is no coordination, and of course, the law should talk about coordination. This has to be centralized. This is technology. I can't say one evidence is lying somewhere and the other is lying another place. This cannot be, because on the cloud they are all connected. So somebody sent somebody money from Telangana to Gurgaon, so from Hyderabad to Gurgaon. So there are two jurisdictions. Now, what if they used an exchange in Russia? Nobody talks. Nobody, has even mentioned among the policymakers. I'm surprised. Nobody's mentioned except for the statement of the Prime Minister. Now, thankfully, what are the inter-country treaties that would look at these things? The Interpol becomes extremely important. Almost in every case, you would need a international intervention in law enforcement. So yes, we are going to see a lot of seamless policy making across key countries. Various nations will have to come together, because everyone will be affected by the other, and they will need their cooperation. We will need the cooperation of European and American companies. They will need us. So I think this needs also to be looked at as a cohesive part of the entire strategy.
So basically what we are talking about is that it is not a simple law we are talking about. We are talking of an entire framework. We are talking of multi-dimensional approach to an issue which is born out of a technology which everybody or every large corporation would like to use and should use, even government should use, because it's going to make life so much more easier. So concluding remarks from all three of you before I close. Sumit, your concluding remarks, 1 or 2 minutes.
I believe there is the gap in the intentions and the intentions of the Prime Minister and the ability of the administration and the judiciary to execute that. We need, as Deepak ji has rightly said, a multidisciplinary team. We need a set of enabling legislations to make investigation, charge sheets, and prosecution of this kind of violations and offenses. And we need a better understanding of the technology. We don't even know what is this beast is all about. We also need to have better investigative and intelligence capabilities to understand, to tap this, or to pin this right at the right moment. So there is a long way ahead. It is a small step, but in the right direction. And I hope that things are taken in the right spirit at the right to the right conclusion.
I would say that we need an open-ended legislation which will grow with time. What do you say, Janab Allah?
Thank you very much. There are three aspects: the regulatory, legislative, policy, and the policy. The second is the aspect of technical infrastructure, ably assisted with artificial intelligence supported analytics, which will involve a command control center and the various spin-offs in terms of subsidiary centers going down to the lowest levels. And the third is the actionable intelligence. So I come in, I'm not competent for the first. That's for wonderful brains like you all who worked all your lives on this and come up with very interesting insights and books of this that you all have written. I am talking only of the second and the third. Having worked in a connected, let's say, environment where such things, infrastructure, coordination mattered in order to be able to extract cull inputs to be able to go and take immediate action and neutralize the threat which is being put, is where I come from. So I think if these two aspects are dovetailed alongside policy, it will make a lot of difference. For that, I'm afraid you can't let this remain in the financial domain. You can't let this remain in the RBI domain. You cannot let it remain entirely in the security domain. There has to be a huge amount of coordination. And to my mind, while they are a think tank, I would say that the National Security Council Secretary are the best people to have this sort of a command control center to be able to coordinate. Thank you very much indeed.
Well
everybody.
said, sir.
Yeah.
Deepak, your views, final comments to make?
I
What do you
think
recommend in terms of policy making or in terms of legislation we're talking about? What would you suggest needs to be added or what needs to be enlarged?
see, a policy is good enough. But any policy is not going to do anything by itself. I think a good policy by a capable country and capable minds and such a progressive government today that we have can be put together in a matter of 2 to 3 months. And I have reason to believe that it will be very competitive. It could even create benchmarks. But what would it do? If you cannot use the tool, how useful is it? So we need to educate our law enforcement, and rightly said by General Bhala that the entire apparatus of under the National Security Council. We need to do that. We need to bring RBI, in connected to that. So two big things. One, there has to be a national, if I may use a very crude term, a national pipeline of crypto. All transactions crypto should ultimately flow through one pipeline in which there is a firewall. I'm using very crude words when I say firewall. It could be a forensic software which has capability of detecting all global red flag names and exchanges and people who are red flagged globally. So that's the international cooperation that we would need, and let that entire flow happen through that one single pipe ultimately, so that the RBI and the national security apparatus are very clear that each and every transaction that is going through that, and they are looking at it threadbare through a software, through artificial intelligence. Forensic softwares are fairly capable today, not completely. And the offline part also is something that the government needs to think, because there are a lot of hard wallets. Now, a hard wallet could just look like a small pen drive. You could just load, cryptocurrency into it and just be off the internet. And if for example, I have say 5 bitcoins, and I decide that Mr. X needs to be given that 5 bitcoins, and I want some contraband in exchange of it. All I need to do is just pick out that little pen drive like thing, hard wallet, and just physically hand it over, and kind of just write on a piece of paper or just whisper into his or her ear the password. Transaction done. How do you track those things? So the offline intelligence gathering has to be really strengthened, because this will directly and I'm talking about real life examples from Afghanistan. This was an example from Afghanistan. Things have happened in Afghanistan, a few in Iran, and how do you stop that? Because if the wrong kind of people are exchanging, in exchange of cryptocurrency, they are buying arms to to revolt against a nation. How do you stop that? So I think training, capability, and then capacity building, which is training at 4 to 5 levels, is extremely important. One, I think all senior officers across, and I emphasize across every ministry, should get into at least an acclimatization kind of a training where they know the basics of what this beast is. Two, law enforcement needs a nitty-gritty, down to the threadbare level, depending on who deals with what, including technology and forensics. They need to be trained on this. Third, of course, the capacity of technical capacity, command and control centers, forensic softwares, and forensic labs need to be built at various levels across the entire nation, different levels. 4, we need to look at the financial part of the financial departments, including RBI, Ministry of Finance. They need to be really very well conversant with this, because once the tracking happens, once you track something, then you can look at it, if it is good or bad money, black or white. Is it coming through the formal economy, and it's a parallel economy? And then the taxation part of it also, and the money laundering part of it also, which the Minister of Finance looks at pretty closely. Come to the next level, judiciary. If we have all the other things in place, and if the judiciary isn't informed of the nitty-gritty, and they are not on the same page as the rest, what are the laws worth then? How do they pronounce a judgment? How do they know this is a good evidence and this is not a good evidence and this is bad evidence? So there has to be some system in place wherein the judiciary, either they do it themselves, or there is a system in place wherein they are enabled by another agency or another organization to do that part for them conclusively. So I think that should sum up what my understanding of things is. Thank you so much.
So basically, we are talking about the law framework moving from the British created police acts or criminal acts of 1820s and 1850s to modern times, which will include the digital and various other aspects of the criminal issues or the financial transactions. We're talking of a law which should be rather open-ended, expanding as the time permits, and also have within that framework entire process of creating multi-level, multidisciplinary approach, having a central command and having various departments and various people involved in it. So I hope that the legislation being discussed goes to that extent and is not hurriedly pushed through. And we have serious bipartisan discussion on it, not only within Parliament, also outside the Parliament, and have experts advise the parliamentary committees in a proper manner with the required patience and required technology exposure. So we can have a successful system. We are not talking of banning cryptocurrencies, remember, at least I am not. I am talking of regulating, because once you create something as illegal, it goes underground, then it's very difficult to control it. We need regulations where these things will be, maybe the other private cryptocurrencies will remain digital assets like so many other assets, but at the same time, financial transactions happen with the legalized legal tender of central bank, and also an environment where things will not be used for illegal activities like terrorism and drug, etc. Thank you so much, Lieutenant General Bhalla, Deepak Kapoor, and CA Sumit Mehta. I hope this discussion enlightens many people who watch this YouTube. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shardaji. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.